1943. The moment the Allied forces landed on Italian soil, the country fractured in two. The government surrendered. The Germans moved in. And in the chaos that followed, thousands of Italian women found themselves trapped inside a war that had no mercy for the innocent. They were arrested, interrogated, imprisoned, and subjected to horrors that defied every law of human decency. Some were partisans, some were Jews, some were simply in the wrong place. What happened to them inside those cells and camps is a story that history buried for too long. The moment Italy broke. September 8th, 1943, is a date that every Italian who lived through it remembered for the rest of their lives. It was the day Marshal Pietro Badoglio announced Italy's armistice with the Allies on national radio. For one brief, electric moment, young people poured into the streets. They embraced strangers. They wept with relief. They believed, with every fiber of their exhausted hearts, that the war was finally over for them. They had no idea it was just beginning. Within hours, German forces that had been stationed across Italy transformed from allies into occupiers. They moved with terrifying speed and precision, seizing control of cities, railways, communication lines, and military installations before Italian soldiers even had time to understand what was happening. The Italian army, leaderless and abandoned by its commanders, collapsed almost overnight. And in the vacuum that followed, the German SS and the Italian fascist Republican forces loyal to Mussolini's puppet state in the north began hunting. They were hunting for partisans, for Jews, for anyone who opposed the new order. Men and women were not spared. Who they were. To understand what happened to Italian female prisoners, you first have to understand who these women were. History has a tendency to reduce victims to statistics, to blur individual faces into collective tragedy. But these were specific, vivid human beings with names and stories and futures that were stolen from them. Some were members of the Italian resistance, the Partigiani, women who had made the conscious and courageous decision to fight back against fascism and occupation. They carried weapons, delivered intelligence, printed underground newspapers, and sheltered Allied soldiers at enormous personal risk. They knew what arrest meant. They chose to resist anyway. Some were Jewish women, caught in the wave of deportations that followed Italy's occupation, where Italy had passed its own racial laws in 1938. But the full machinery of the Holocaust did not reach Italian Jews until the Germans took control. From October 1943 onward, roundups began in Rome, Florence, Milan, and across the north. Families were torn apart on streets and in homes, loaded onto trains, and sent toward fates that most would not survive. Inside the interrogation rooms, the arrests often happened at night. That was deliberate. There is something about darkness and the sudden violence of a door being broken down that strips away a person's sense of reality and safety in ways that daylight never quite achieves. Women were pulled from their beds, sometimes in front of their children, given no explanation, and taken to facilities that ranged from formal prisons to makeshift detention centers in commandeered buildings. What happened inside those rooms has been documented through survivor testimony, post-war trials, and the painstaking work of historians who refused to let these accounts disappear. The interrogations were designed to break, not just to extract information, though that was the stated purpose, but to destroy the psychological resistance of the woman sitting across from her interrogators. Sleep deprivation was standard. Women were kept awake for days, questioned in rotating shifts by officers who never tired because they could simply be replaced. The mind, deprived of sleep, begins to fracture in ways that are almost impossible to describe to someone who has not experienced it. Reality becomes unreliable. The will to resist softens like wax held near a flame. And then there were the violations that women found hardest to speak about even decades later. The ones that targeted not just the body, but the deepest sense of self and dignity. Sexual violence was used as a weapon of interrogation and control with a frequency and deliberateness that post-war Italy was deeply reluctant to confront. The shame that should have belonged entirely to the perpetrators was instead carried for lifetimes by the women who survived. The camps they were sent to. Women who survived initial interrogation were transferred to prisons or concentration camps. Inside Italy, facilities like San Vittore prison in Milan became notorious. San Vittore was designed to hold far fewer people than it contained during the occupation years. Women were packed into cells, given minimal food, denied adequate sanitation, and subjected to a regime of arbitrary punishment that kept them in a constant state of fear and uncertainty. Some Italian female prisoners were deported beyond Italy's borders entirely. They entered the vast network of Nazi concentration camps, where the conditions defied comprehension. Ravensbrück, the camp in northern Germany specifically designed for women, received Italian prisoners alongside women from across occupied Europe. At its peak, Ravensbrück held tens of thousands of women who were subjected to forced labor, medical experimentation, starvation, and systematic brutality. The medical experiments conducted at Ravensbrück on female prisoners represent one of the war's most deeply disturbing chapters. SS physicians performed surgical procedures without anesthesia, deliberately infected wounds to test treatments, Abwanner removed bones and muscles from living women, and conducted experiments whose stated scientific purpose barely concealed their true nature as exercises in absolute power over bodies deemed worthless by the state. Women who could no longer work were selected for death. The silence that followed liberation. When the war ended in April 1945 and Italy began the long and painful process of rebuilding itself, something unexpected happened to the stories of female prisoners. They were buried, not through any single deliberate decision, but through the accumulated weight of a culture that found these stories too complicated, too painful, and too threatening to the post-war narratives Italy needed to construct about itself. The dominant story of the Italian resistance became largely male. The heroism was male. The martyrdom was male. Now women who had suffered and fought and died were moved quietly to the margins. For survivors of sexual violence, the silence was even more complete. In a society where a woman's honor was bound to her sexual purity in ways that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with control, many survivors made the devastating calculation that speaking meant losing everything they had left. Their marriages, their standing in their communities, their ability to simply live without being defined by what had been done to them against their will. So they did not speak, and the world did not ask. Reclaiming what was taken. It took decades. It took the slow, generational work of feminist historians, documentary filmmakers, Ace and the survivors themselves finally deciding in the final years of their lives that silence was no longer something they were willing to give. Women like Carla Caponi, a Roman partisan who had fought in the streets of her city and survived to tell it. Women who gave testimony that shook courtrooms and classrooms and anyone willing to truly listen. Their suffering was real. Their courage was real. And their demand to be remembered, not as footnotes, but as full human beings who stood at the center of one of history's darkest storms, is a demand that history is only now beginning to truly honor. Italy broke in September 1943. But the women inside that broken country did not, and that is something worth remembering.